Hi, I'm Mike from 1A Auto. We've been selling auto parts for over 30 years. We're dedicated to delivering quality auto parts, expert customer service, fast and free shipping, all backed by our 100% satisfaction guarantee. So visit us at 1aauto.com, your trusted source for quality auto parts.
In this video, we're going to be working with our 1996 GMC Sierra. We're going to show you how to remove and replace your vehicle's upper intake manifold. If you like this video, please click subscribe. We have a ton more information on this and many other vehicles. And if you need this part for your truck, you can follow the link down in the description over to 1aauto.com. Here are the items you'll need for this repair. Lift up on the latches and remove the upper portion of your airbox. Unplug the intake air temp and mass airflow sensors. Pop the breather line off and undo the thumb screw. Rock the upper part of the intake forward and remove it from the vehicle. Disconnect the throttle cables from the throttle body. The cruise control cable just pops forward. With the throttle body open, you should have enough slack in the throttle cable to bring it around to the gap and slide the end of the cable out. Remove the throttle cable bracket. There's a 10mm bolt at the throttle body and a 10mm nut down on the manifold side. We'll do this with a 10mm socket and ratchet. Lift up and remove the throttle bracket. And all we're going to do is just pull this out of the way and tuck it off to the side. Label and remove all of your electrical connectors. It's not entirely necessary to label these, but I like to, just because once you get back to putting everything together, it can be a little tricky remembering exactly what went where. So we're going to disconnect everything attached to the upper intake manifold, as well as the ignition coil and module, because those will have to come off. Then we should have enough room to release the harnesses and move them out of the way while we lift this off. So we'll disconnect the throttle position sensor, idle air control connector, the purge and vent solenoids on the side, the ignition control module, and the ignition coil. And of course, the injector connector at the top, which will pop that tab off. It may help to have a small flat blade screwdriver to pry out the tabs and remove the injector connector. You'll also need to undo the connector on the manifold absolute pressure sensor. Pop off any wire harness retainers you find around the vehicle as well. Just to help get some more slack on the harness for when we remove the intake. Disconnect any hoses attached to the intake. We have one on the passenger side, one on the driver's, and then one at the back for the vacuum booster, which we'll need a pair of pliers to remove. Use a pair of pliers to release the clamp on the vacuum booster hose. Sometimes if the hose is stuck, it helps to just hold the edges with a pair of pliers and work it side to side to loosen it up. Remove the 3 10mm nuts securing the evap solenoids to the side of the intake manifold with a 10mm socket and ratchet. We'll now remove these from the vehicle. Now you can either just hang them off to the side like this, or you can undo that connector if you'd like. Remove the two 10mm nuts on the bracket for the ignition coil and control module. We'll then lift up and remove this harness retainer bracket. Move the harness retainer bracket out of the way. You'll then need to remove the three 10mm nuts below that bracket, securing your ignition coil to the intake. We can then hang that bracket off to the side as well. Remove the cap on the fuel Schrader valve. And it's usually best to use a fuel pressure test tool to thread on there, which usually has a relief hose on it that you can place into an appropriate container. But you just want to push down here and make sure you bleed off any pressure in the fuel system. Using a T20 Torx driver, you can use a screwdriver or a bit and a ratchet like I am here. Remove the two screws securing the distributor cap onto the distributor. Now we're only doing this to gain access to the fuel lines, so you should just be able to unscrew the cap and push it back and out of the way without undoing any of your plug wires. If you do find the need to undo your plug wires, just be sure to mark where they came off of so they all go back in the same place. Now, you're not really going to be able to see the other T20 because it's on the back side of the cap, but you can see the little indent there, and just kind of do that one by feel. And where this screw is hard to reach and see and you don't want to drop it, I suggest lifting up on the cap while you unscrew it to keep it in there. And then once it's out, it should be a little easier to pop out and keep your hands on. We're gonna just move this out of the way. Using a 16mm flare nut wrench, loosen the fuel fittings on the back of the fuel lines. These are down behind the intake on the driver's side. And then remove the 10mm bolt securing the fuel line bracket to the back of the engine block. We'll do this with the 10mm socket, ratchet, and extension. Remove the 10mm nut underneath the thermostat hose or the upper radiator hose with a 10mm socket and ratchet. This is securing a bracket that holds a little more of the wire harness in place, so we'll want that out of our way. And it looks like this one is stuck together a little bit, so we're actually pulling the stud out too here, it would appear. And that's perfectly fine because we're just going to hang this out of the way, and we would need to remove that stud in order to take the manifold off anyway. We'll also want to remove the 10mm nut securing the bracket over the EGR tube. We'll lift that bracket up and move that out of the way as well. Now, some of our nuts came out with the studs on them, so just follow around the perimeter of the upper intake manifold, which is the black plastic piece, and you should have somewhere between 13, or in our case 8 studs left to remove. So just go around and take all of those out with a 10mm socket and ratchet. Remove the two 8mm nuts securing the fuel lines onto the injector bracket here. You'll want to lift the bracket off first the little hold down that we just unscrewed there. Remove that, and then pull the fuel lines out of the housing. You may need a little help prying these up. Remove those fuel lines completely. Work the upper intake. This can take a little bit of effort to remove because the injector assembly here actually stays in the lower manifold. So when we pop this cover off, we're trying to break this loose here too. Once you've got it off of the injectors, just work it up and out of the vehicle. We'll have to remove our throttle body to install on our new intake manifold. To do this, we'll remove the 5.5mm intake hold down stud, as well as the two 8mm bolts. We'll do this with the 5.5mm socket and ratchet on this stud and an 8mm on the other two. We'll then remove the throttle body. We'll also need to remove the fitting for our brake booster, as well as the one for the PCV and our manifold absolute pressure sensor. To remove the pressure sensor, we'll spray a little lubricant on the bottom side, and while you can do this in the vehicle, these tend to break. So removing it this way allows you to lubricate it, or if it were to break on you, it won't fall into the engine. We'll also lubricate the bottom side of the vacuum fitting for the master cylinder. Pop that out, as well as our PCV. Here we have our old part that we removed from our vehicle and our new part from 1AAuto.com. As you can see, these parts are exactly the same. We have the same size and shape of the intake manifold, same mounting locations for our throttle body, all of our bolts and brackets, PCV, master cylinder, hose fitting, manifold absolute pressure sensors, and the breather we have over here as well. Comes with a new throttle body gasket and a new upper intake manifold gasket. It also includes a new gasket for the injector assembly. If your old manifold has cracked or broken and is creating leaks, this new part from 1A Auto will go in direct fit, just like your original equipment, and fix you up right. Install your PCV. Your master cylinder vacuum line fitting, and your manifold absolute pressure sensor. We'll then install the throttle body with the two 8mm bolts. And the 5.5mm intake hold down stud. We'll start these with an 8mm socket. And this with a 5.5. We'll then torque all three to 18 inch-pounds. Wipe down the gasket surface with a clean rag or paper towel that you've sprayed some cleaning solution on. I like to use brake parts cleaner. You could also use a carburetor cleaner or a throttle body or fuel injection type cleaner. Really any kind of solvent that'll work to get that dirt and oil up and off of there. Remove the old O-ring or gasket from the injector assembly and install the new one included with your kit. Reinstall the upper intake manifold. Be sure to move all your wiring harnesses, lines, brackets, and anything else you had to loosen or remove. Now, it is a little tricky to get the upper intake manifold to sit down onto the plug for the spider. Just make sure that you work it on there. It will sit down. You do have to give it a little bit of force. So take your time, work it down onto that gasket, and make sure that it seals fully before attempting to install the bolts. Otherwise, you risk damaging the manifold. Now we're going to start in the 12 o'clock position on our intake manifold and work our way around clockwise. You may choose to do this differently, but we do need to get all of our bolts and any brackets that these bolts secure in place before torquing our intake manifold. Now I just have the 10mm socket on an extension here just to help me get some of these bolts started in. And it is a little tricky to line this up, so you do want to make sure that you take the time to get all the bolts started before tightening anything down. Otherwise, you may find yourself loosening hardware to get other pieces in place. Be sure to install any brackets you removed. Once you've got all your bolts in and started, go ahead and bring them down until they just touch the intake so we can begin our torque sequence. We'll torque the intake manifold following the proper torque sequence in 2 passes. The first pass will be 44 inch-pounds or 5 Newton-meters, and the second pass will be 88 inch-pounds or 10 Newton-meters. Reinstall any brackets that sat over the studs on the upper intake. Like here we have the cylinder head temperature sensor. Also reinstall this bracket over the ignition coil and control module. Reinstall the fuel lines. Reinstall the hold down bracket and the 2 8mm nuts. Reinstall the fuel lines by getting the flare nuts lined up and threaded in and tightening them down with a 16mm wrench. You can then reinstall the 10mm hold down bolt to the fuel line bracket. And make sure you reinstall the cap on the fuel Schrader valve. Reinstall your distributor cap, the 2 T20 torque screws. I recommend doing the one in the front first because you can see it and line everything up, and it's easier to install the back one after that. Reconnect all of your electrical connectors. Be sure to snap back all of the loom retainers as well after you've connected the closest pieces to make sure that they all stay the same length. Don't forget to snap the safety back into the connector on the fuel injector manifold. You'll then want to reconnect any vacuum or breather lines that you unplugged. Reconnect the brake booster hose at the back of the intake and compress the clamp with a pair of pliers and slide it back into place. Reinstall the throttle cable bracket. We have the 10mm bolt securing it to the throttle body and the 10mm nut on the bottom where it slides over the stud for the intake manifold. We'll then tighten those down with the 10mm socket and ratchet. To reconnect the throttle cable, open the throttle manually and rotate the cable so it fits through the slot. Push the cable end in and set it into its guide. Then lift up a little and snap the clip for the cruise control cable back onto its tab. Reinstall the intake tube by hooking the tab over the front of the throttle body and setting the back into place. Reinstall the thumb screw onto the stud. Reinstall the tube into the filter, as well as locking it into the back of the airbox. Reconnect your mass airflow and intake air temp sensors. Drop the lid back into place. Secure the tabs, install the breather line, and you're good to go.
Thanks for watching. Visit us at oneauto.com for quality auto parts, fast and free shipping, and the best customer service in the industry.